Welcome to class number 3 of Meditation School. Good to be here with you. If you're here live, if you're here by recording, good to be here with you as well. If you're here on recording, stop watching the news and eating cereal. Put it down and focus. I'm not just another YouTube video, okay? uh, welcome everyone. So tonight we have a very special topic. It's on seeing energy, which tends to be one of people's most favorite topics. And we're going to go into it. But before we do, I just want to go over a little bit of what we did in our last class and the step that we're taking. So in the last class, we worked on the fundamentals of meditation. And the first fundamental of meditation was creating a new baseline for our consciousness, right? So we're not just constantly lost in thought and worry, living in our story, believing we're nothing but our bodies, always stressed out and being pulled by the future. So as we deepen into meditation, we shift that base of consciousness. And then the second fundamental of meditation was learning tools, which is what we're going to do more of today. One of the tools we already learned last week, which was to ground ourselves. We learned in week 1, to ground ourselves in the first class. And today we're going to go a little bit deeper into some tools. And I want to share with you my favorite tool of all, which is learning to see. You know, when somebody says, "Oh, I see," you tell them something and it feels true to them. And they're like, "Oh yeah, I see. I can see that." They're seeing something. We call it insight. So to be able to see in. So insight, I could see in. So we have 2 eyes to see out, and we have 1 eye, the mind's eye, that can see in. So when I close my eyes and I start meditating, I see inwards, right? And if I've told some of my classes this before, I like to use this example. If you're ever finding yourself in love, you know, that gushy, someone will say, "Oh, he can see me," right? Or she sees me. She's the first person to ever see me. And there's this special feeling that we get inside of ourselves when we really get a sense that somebody else can see us or hear us, right? So if somebody really hears us, it feels so fulfilling. Have you ever been to like a social gathering and somebody looks at you and goes, "So what do you like to do? What are your favorite hobbies?" And you know how you like light up. You're like, "Oh, let me tell you what I love." And you start talking, to listening. We all love that. We love being heard. We love being seen. And meditation is the ultimate form of being able to hear and to see and to know yourself, right? So when people are looking for answers and they close their eyes, how are they going to find those answers? You're going to feel, you're going to listen to your inner voice. You might see an image, and you might just know something off the top of your head. You just get this deep knowingness. I took this class when I was a philosophy major in college called epistemology. And my girlfriend in college at the time, when I told her I was taking that class, she's like, "No, that's not a real word. It doesn't exist." I was like, "I swear, I swear." And so epistemology is the study of knowledge. And leave it to philosophers to sit around in a circle. We actually had class outside under a tree with my favorite professor, Trip McCrossan, who I just saw a few months ago for the first time in like 10, 12 years. Amazing guy, still teaching at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And we would sit around and discuss what it means to know something. The entire class was based on what does it mean to really, really know something. And we spent a fair amount of time in some of my philosophy classes studying Socrates and Plato. And if you go back to ancient Greece and you go to the Temple of Delphi, which is where they say that the oracles lived, and they would tell people their fortunes. Wouldn't that be cool? Go to an oracle in Greece. Anybody here want to go to an oracle? And in the inscription on the temple said, "Know thyself. Know thyself." of all things it could have said. It said, know thyself. And it's said that the oracles said that the wisest man in all of Athens was Socrates. And if you went to Socrates, or if you read him now, they say if you went to him, he would say that the only thing he was sure of is that he wasn't sure of anything. So the wisest man in all of Athens isn't sure of anything. Interesting, right? So that ability or that awareness that I don't know a lot, that humility was a sign of intelligence for the oracles. But an oracle, what does an oracle do? An oracle closes their eyes and they see something and then they share that fortune, right? Or a prophet, right? Prophets will like see something and they'll download a message from the gods and then create a world religion. Maybe we should do that here in meditation school, 1,000 years from now. And then one day, David said, for the love of God, I hope that never happens. Anyway, so the oracles said that Socrates was the wisest man in all of Athens, and for them, wisdom also meant to know thyself, right? It was inscripted on the temple of Delphi. And when we meditate, that's what we're doing. We're closing our eyes, we're looking into ourselves, we're having insight, and we're knowing ourselves. And in knowing ourselves, that doesn't mean we quote unquote know things. It doesn't mean I know everything, I understand everything. But what it does mean, I think, is when you know yourself in some existential sense, you know everything. It doesn't mean you understand how everything works. It doesn't mean you understand how every particle in the universe functions, interacts. But we're all made of the same stuff. And in some way, when you really know yourself, you kind of start to get it. There's something you get about life. And this is your own inner laboratory, right? This is a subjective science where you go inwards and inspect yourself and start to understand who you are, understand how your mind functions. And from that, so much is born. So when we go to find our answers to life, those big, deep answers, where do we look? We can look outside or inside, right? But there's nobody in the world that's going to be able to tell you, like, this is the right partner for you, or that's the best career choice, or this is who you really are, or this is the meaning of the universe, right? Or all of those answers are ones that you have to look inside yourself to find. Those really meaningful, kind of ethereal, sensitive answers, they're not something that some professor or guru or teacher or guide can ultimately answer for you. And any good teacher is going to teach you how to look inside yourself so you can find those answers. So in Socrates saying, I don't know anything, I'm not really sure of anything, that's a great teaching of saying, and also if pointing to the Temple of Delphi, know thyself. So I don't know anything, and the highest wisdom is to know yourself. Those are kind of pointers, right? In every great spiritual teaching and even secular teaching these days with meditation, all point to that. If you want peace and happiness, calmness, if you want low blood pressure and a clear mind, you have to know yourself and untangle all those emotional webs and wounds and heal yourself. And then all of a sudden you start to know yourself, and then your life has clarity and purpose and direction, and it feels more grounded. If you're walking around with 15 wounds that you've never healed, and every time somebody says something, you snap, then you probably don't know yourself so well, right? Because you haven't looked deeply into all those wounds and healed them. And so the world is taking you for a ride. So part of knowing ourselves is also healing ourselves, which can be a pain in the ass. Right? It takes work. Sometimes it hurts. When we close our eyes, it's not all just unicorns and rainbows. Sometimes there's old pain and memories that come up, pockets where we feel stuck and closed. And like I said in the first class, I shared the story about a woman who would count to 500. That was her meditation, but would always tell me there was nothing wrong. If there was nothing wrong with me at all and I felt like totally perfect, I wouldn't sit and count to 500. I would be out like jet skiing or something. I was sitting once with a friend. I had just come back from India and I was talking about Hinduism and Buddhism and all these things I was learning about and my experiences in ashrams and meditating, sitting with monks and gurus. And and my friend was very religious at the time. He was Jewish and he said, "Oh, none of those things are real. Only the Old Testament is real." And I remember my sensibilities got like offended. You know, I was young and I was arrogant and I was just like, you don't know. And I didn't say that out loud, but I just got kind of angry. I lost control on the inside. And then all of a sudden I had this thought. It just, I don't know where it came from, but it's just like clear image. It popped into my mind. And I had this memory of a Buddhist teacher saying, if a blind man bumped into you, and you got angry and then you turned around in that anger and you looked at him and was like and you were like, hey, oh, you're blind, that anger would almost immediately disappear. You'd be like, oh, it was an accident, there was no malice, right? And so I have this thought. I'm going, okay, this person maybe is a little bit ignorant about the rest of the world. They haven't been to any of these places yet. And so that's kind of a good story. And as I'm having this thought, like it's literally going through my head, we're in the middle of a fancy New York restaurant, right, at lunch hour, and somebody bumps into me right in the middle of the restaurant. We weren't on the edge or anything. And I was like, ah, and I look over and it was a blind man with like one of the sticks that they use, I forget what it's called, to help themselves get by. He bumped into the back of me as I was having that thought of, oh, that Buddhist teacher once said, if a blind man bumps into you and you got angry, then you realized he was blind, you would let it go. And at that moment, I realized, I had a realization and I saw what was happening. I was like, wow, life, could that have been any more direct? I had someone pissed me off. I had this memory, this thought, this memory of a Buddhist teacher having given me this teaching. And then the actual thing physically happened while I was lost in that thought and coping with some anger. And then at that moment, the anger totally did just dissipate. It just left my body because I realized what was happening. Wouldn't it be cool if every life lesson was that visceral? It just smacked you upside the head. I have had other moments that come close to that, but that was a good one. Anybody else ever have a moment like that? Feel free to share. So when we start to get more intimate with ourselves and have insight, we start to get more intimate with the truth and we're able to see things more clearly. And in today's meditation, we're going to start to see and look at energy. And this is one of the most common questions I get, which is like, David, what do you mean look at energy? What does that even mean? How do you look at energy? And the way I like to describe it is, if you have a thought, say a thought comes up in your mind's eye, and you lose yourself in that thought, right? Maybe it's an invalidating loop of thoughts. What is the energy behind the thought? We always get lost in the story, right? This person said that to me. They sent me an email. Like cats and dogs. But what is the energy behind the thought? I look at it for a moment and I go, oh, it's invalidation. They invalidated me. Okay, let's look a little bit closer than that. What's the energy kind of behind the invalidation? Maybe you stare at it for a moment and this happened to me once, this exact scenario. Somebody invalidated me and I was just looping in this set of thoughts, feeling judged and criticized, like upset. And I just, with my eyes closed, I was looking at this set of thoughts in my mind's eye. I was like, oh, it's so invalidating. And then I was like, why am I so invalidated? And I was looking at the energy and then this image just popped out of a memory of like oh man, this girl broke my heart. And there was still pain from that. And it had nothing to do with this particular criticism, but somehow they were correlated. And that's why I was actually upset. It was just by looking at these images passing in my mind and almost inspecting them. It was almost like I took the film reel and I turned it around to look at the back of it to see what was really going on. Like, what was the energy that gave this particular film reel juice? That it stuck, that it velcroed to my consciousness and affected my body and my emotions so much. And in that particular moment, and that it ended up being heartbreak. And it was something I hadn't fully worked through. And so in that moment, I had to start working through that, and the tears started coming out. And some of you asked last week, last class, how do you work through that? How do I get through it? You start by looking and finding understanding, and sometimes just realization. You just have realization. You just start to recognize the truth by sitting with something, and then when you recognize the truth, emotion starts to process. Sometimes chunks of energy just like come off of you, old boulders off your heart or off your head. Responsibility comes off your shoulders. You know, somebody who stabbed you in the back, you kind of energetically pull out the knife, right? Someone who's been a pain in your ass, you're like, oh, I can feel it come right off my butt. Or someone's been a pain in your neck, you're like, oh, it's coming out of my throat. So we'll have these very visceral experiences. Not everyone will experience things in the same way, but for me, I would have very visceral experiences, like physically things would start to move out of my body. I would feel them. But before that would happen, I would often need to see them and understand, right? So we deepen into understanding in meditation. That's one form of seeing energy. There are many. I mean, ultimately, everything is made of energy. There's an energy that emanates every form, whether it's a thought form, emotion form, or physical form. There's a professor at, I think, Cambridge, or maybe it's Oxford, I can't remember. I've been emailing with him about him coming on my podcast, and he says, uh, Satish Kumar, I think I have it right, is his name. And he said, he's a philosopher, and he says, when you look at a tree, right, you say the tree is made of, there's branches, you know, there are roots, there's bark, water, there's dirt, right? All of these different elements that make up a tree. But if you cut off a branch, the tree would still be there. If it didn't have water for a month, the tree would still be there. It's greater than the sum of all of its parts. There's an essence inside of this thing that we call a tree, that you get a sense of the tree. You can get a sense of the energy of the wholeness of the tree that transcends any single part of the tree, right? And it has a quality to it, and it's hard to describe, but you just know this is tree. This is the energy of this tree. And I think when we fall in love with somebody, whether it's a family member or partner, friend, whoever it is, there's something similar, right? Even maybe they get really old, but there's an essence inside of them that transcends their physical body that you can feel, and that you can feel inside yourself. So you know you may not feel older now than when you were 20 years younger or 40 years younger, right? Your consciousness isn't really getting old. The body is getting old. There's an essence in you that isn't. And so that essence, that energy, it emanates everything. It emanates the rocks and the trees and the clouds and the stars and physical bodies, human bodies. But we forget to really notice it because we're so busy with our lives and we get lost in the material reductionist kind of world. But when we step back and we start to meditate, all of a sudden we get a sense of that energy again. And we can start to see it, that essence, and feel it in ourselves and in others. So everything emanates that energy. In almost every culture in the history of the world, they'll see everything as emanating with energy and life. Only in our Western culture are rocks dead and animals are alive. but in most cultures, everything is permeated with life. So when we meditate, I want you to maybe open up to some of that possibility, some of that awareness. Every single person who has ever deepened into some kind of enlightened state in meditation will always come out and say, oh, wow, I touched something and I could feel that everything was connected, that everything was alive, right? Doesn't matter what year they were meditating in or what culture, what gender, they always come out with that awareness. Once the mind quiets down, all of a sudden you experience this connection. Isn't that interesting? And that connection is always there. It's there all the time. It's just waiting for you, but you're too busy thinking about the last person who invalidated you. I'm going to send you a nasty email after class and then a PS. Just kidding. Just want to make sure you're centered.